lady is not here yet. Elizabeth isn't here yet. And I wanted to start out with her paper, but I cannot start out with her paper when she's not here. So we have to postpone this a little bit until she comes. Okay, let me see if I can sort out all this stuff here. First of all, I have something for you. We want to go through the tests today. Remember, we postponed the tests the last time. So tonight is the test discussion. And I have to put that back for a moment. And then I have printed out something for you. So let's start out with that. I told you that we want to get in contact with this Goldstein. Yeah. And so I did, and Goldstein was very happy, and he will do whatever he can in order to get you things through. He will put it before the board, and I told you I'm part of the board, so, but, there has to be discussed every project, and so it's very democratic. This same Goldstein has written a critique of Mike Ott's book. Really? About the future of religion, and here is the critique, and I give it to you. You can take it home. So that shows you what's going on in Dubrovnik. He's at Harvard now. Goldstein. He has a fellowship at Harvard. Yeah. And you can read. So he goes to the different contributions in the book. There are two for me in the beginning and the end, and then the others in between. But the description which he gave of my part there is very, very good. I think he understood the whole thing. When he was in Dubrovnik, he was a little bit confused. He wants to be some kind of a left-wing Weberian and make, dialecticize Weber. And question is that's possible. So there's also something about Janst, and he's in New Orleans. The professor in New Orleans is almost drowned there. And this whole thing happened. And Michael Ott, he will come a week from Saturday, so to our colonial kitchen thing. So if you want to talk with him, there's Helmut Fritsche. He didn't write that right there. So he is in what was East Germany, Rostock. He's retired now, and then who else do we have there?
So Michael's book is $148.
Yeah. Don't look at the material things, Walter. Then there is Rudolf Kukoc. He is the foreign minister of Croatia. Now you have to stand up and salute. Rudolf Kukoc. But he is not there anymore because his party was thrown out.
Social Democrat.
Harald Köckler is a Habermasian guy who wants to overthrow Habermas. But he hasn't done so yet, so he's still working. Aurelia Margaretic had good professors in Berlin, but then somehow messed up her life a little bit. She was married to a Croat, and then they were thrown out of Croatia and went back to Germany, and she went to education, and she wrote something about her educational experience there. And then we have the end of the whole thing there again. So just read that for the next time, and then we can discuss it a little bit, or you can read it now.
Oh, the Serbian Orthodox Church.
Then this is the book here about which he wrote this. So I let that go through in case you haven't seen it yet. Okay. These are the articles in there. Okay. Any question about this? So he is a good fellow. To make contact for all of you who would like to write something. Article or book or whatever, they print monographs, and it is the publisher in Holland. Byrd is the publisher, and so that is a wonderful source or outlet for us, So let's cultivate this as much as possible. Okay, then here, Gregory Baum just sent me today the Theology of Tariq Ramadan, a Catholic Perspective. That would be interesting for you, and I told Gregory that I will recommend his book to you. The chapters are Catholicism challenged by modernity, so he starts out with his own position. Then Tariq Ramadan's location on the Islamic spectrum, the universal message of Islam, the Sharia, the Muslim way of life, and Western Muslims. Then Ramadan challenged by liberalism, and the concluding reflections, an appendix, the 10 Commandments for peace. So Gregory does that. He takes certain people and highlights them, and he did this now for, he was supposed to go down to Notre Dame, and the State Department forbid it, and he's now at Oxford, right?
Yes.
Siebert. Okay, we let this go through. Now, I just thought that what I showed already on Saturday, so here's a Catholic of 2009, but in 1200, there we have the Summa Contra Gentiles by Thomas Aquinas, and I just wrote to Gregory, I said, your book is even better than the Summa Contra Gentiles, and that was already a good one by 1200. And you have these old traditions, that was 700 years ago. When you have a discourse which lasts for 700 years, But this, Habermas is very excited about this Summa Contra Gentiles, because, you have the Averroes and all the great Arabs, and Thomas would put all their arguments, 12 arguments, and then Thomas goes and takes every argument and makes a counter-argument. So the fundamental rules of discourse, that you let the other have his, the same possibilities which you have. It's a Catholic type of thing, And this year, as I said, that is responsible that Europe did not become Muslim, because between 1000 and 1200, the Islamic culture, reached its peak along the African coast and in Spain, and they almost overthrow. Paris was collapsing, because the Arabs had an Aristotelian interpretation of Islam, and the Europeans had a Platonic interpretation of Islam, and Platonism is a little bit otherworldly, and so to put this whole thing into the real world now, that was an unbelievable, powerful thing. And what Thomas did, he took the opposition, the trick of the opposition, and took it over. It's the same thing if you would give a Marxist interpretation today of Christianity, or you would give a Freudian interpretation or Nietzschean interpretation. So wild it was. And he had problems with his own church, he was charged with heresy and so on. But he and Bonaventura, Westwood, and of course the battle which took place in the European armies threw out the Arabs out of Spain, and so that was of course the other side of it. But intellectually and so on, this book here did it, and you can just look there how the thesis, there's caput, it's called, the headings, and then how it is organized, and it's wonderful in terms of a discourse model. Okay, I'll just let that go through it. So Gregor would be very happy about this. By the way, Gregor is a Jew, and why he's so interested suddenly in the Muslims, that is an interesting case. I have a student there in the other class, 500 class. She's Jewish too, and she wants to write things about the thesis on the Quran, so sometimes the opposites attract each other. Okay, so let me see what else we have here.
Rudy, there was a wonderful movie that brings together the expulsion of the Palestinians, and then I showed this to the class. It begins with the expulsion of the Palestinians, and then it ends at Treblinka.
Yeah.
So it starts with Robert Fisk interviewing people who were expelled by the Jews in 48, and then they interviewed the Jews that took the place of the same family, and the person, the old man in that family, his whole family was at Treblinka and were killed, and then he journeys to Treblinka and visits the people that live in Treblinka and ends the story there, and it's all about how the Palestinians are.
So is it a Jewish family, you mean? Or?
No, it's just sort of tracing this past of European racism pushes the Jews out, and then they end. Most of it is following Palestinians, but it's punctuated by these visits.
Who made the movie?
Robert Fisk, the Independent, Middle East correspondent for the Independent. It was excellent. I just pulled it off the shelf. It was Stupendous.
Really?
It was almost like philosophical work. It was
Very
stupendous.
good.
He's really good.
Yeah. And he speaks Arabic really nice.
He's
real well.
Where is he?
He was in Beirut.
yeah.
I don't know if he's still there.
Very good.
He's that guy that every now and then, when they get the line from the Republicans or the Democrats or the Israeli line, then they go to Robert Fisk and he'll just smash it. You know,
If they let him on that
if
one.
they let him on, exactly.
Very good. Okay, now next point. We want to do that review there. But before this, we want to do something which is in the test too, and this is this contemporary issue. So maybe we can start out with that. I showed you the review there, and you can read it. I showed you the bound book there, and then the new reading will be for after we are finished with the test from critical theory to critical political theology, which is concerned with the theodicy question, which of course the old critical theorists, that's their core problem all the time, and the new ones have taken that over without mentioning it. And Elizabeth has found out about this very nicely. She's identified it, but we have to wait until she comes. Now let's just discuss a few things in that sense, that we are not only talking about new critical theorists, but we are talking about ourselves too as new critical theorists, and how we do time diagnosis or time prognosis. So I just bring up a few things. You know that we discussed here from the beginning, that we came to it, that the Bush cabinet, is under the suspicion of war crimes, and therefore every state of the 190 states of the UN have to take them in and charge them, and have to take them to the next prison and then deliver them to Den Haag. Now there was a test thing, because President Bush went to Canada, and he went first of all to Calgary, which is an oil center in Canada, and that's where most of his friends are, so he went into friendly territory, also not too far away from the border. He had also a whole army of Secret Service with him, but as we predicted, and the question is, our analysis gives prediction. Prediction is a test how good the theory really is. And so we predicted that there would be some stirring in Ottawa, and so it was. The whole group of lawyers came and developed the whole thing, that he had to be taken into prison. And of course, Canada is a friendly country, and they did not want to make a scandal, because you have to take the Secret Service men, put them into prison as well. So he had a closed car. He could not get out of the car. He drove through the back door to give a speech, to make a lot of money with the speech. It was all a closed community in the hall there. And then they shipped him out right away. The protesters were outside shouting, put him into prison, war criminal, and so on. But then he got away with it. And so the commentator says, we don't have the culture in the United States and the will to bring him and his cabinet to justice now. And that is somehow also the case in Canada. Now, if that guy gets away and he will not be sent to Den Haag, the danger is, if you take a non-metaphysical theory of punishment, as Horkheimer does, then the only purpose of punishment is to prevent the repetition of that what has happened. If these people are not put to justice, like the CEOs, of these corporations or this government, then you must expect that sooner or later a new administration will produce even greater crimes than this one did in the last 8 years or so. That is the great danger. So we don't know if, we could make new predictions, but at the moment we don't know if the country will collect its will, political will, and say we have to stop this, against the CEOs as well as against the Bush administration. Rumsfeld, had the same thing in France, and he got away. The Germans helped him out. So the commentator said it was probably necessary that they would stay at home. They cannot, and that was our prediction, that they would not be able to leave the country. But that was, to test the waters, and that's interesting. The gangster is still the gangster, He speculates they will not do that, They will not dare to do that. And the question is, how strong the will is, and if these gangsters really can get away with things, and that would really be awful in terms of the UN scope. Okay, so that is one thing there which we can discuss, which we can analyze. Another thing which came up is that stem cell thing. President Obama has opened up the payments and had made it possible that stem cell research will be paid. And so what would the critical theorists say about this issue? The other one is the Pope in Africa got in trouble. Every 5 minutes the Pope man is getting in trouble, and this time it is AIDS and what to do about AIDS, and the contraceptives can be used, the condom. If the condom should be used, then the Pope said it could not be used, and so the scientists, so we have that culture war. The whole thing splits science and technology on one side, and morality and religion on the other side. And then, of course, in Africa we have another problem that's a polygamic type of a problem. It means the Pope would like to people who convert and have 4 wives, they have to get rid of 3 wives. And the empirical consequence is that 3 wives want to poison the one who stays back, and then they are also not taken care of, so they become prostitutes. And these empirical results, the antagonists, the critics of the Pope say, you are responsible for this. You must be held responsible. If you teach them, that they have to, when they convert, they have to get rid of these 3 wives, then you are responsible for what, he would say leave it to Providence, but that's medieval. So modern people don't trust Providence, so you are responsible for it. And so the theologians, Metz and Küng, have recommended that he would leave it to capitalism, because capitalism does not allow you to have 3 wives or 4 wives. As a matter of fact, here in this country you cannot even pay 1 wife. So what we have is, then with divorce we have successive polygamy. That means we do not have them all in one house, but successively, and live with one and then with the next one, and so on. But that is another problem. So, but to leave it to the objective tendency of the historical process, rather than to produce all these dysfunctional consequences.
Where is the imitatio in this? I mean, in the sense that, Jesus, according to the tradition, has no wife. The biblical patriarchs had multiples. I mean, where's the imitatio for the single?
You mean?
For the Christians? I mean, where is it going?
Well, I think that there were, besides that polygamy, there were always tendencies in China, and I think in the Near East too, towards some kind of monogamic thing. If you look at Muhammad, he had 1 wife, a beloved wife, and he died in the arms of another one. 1 wife, he had in the meantime 5, 6, 7 widows and so on, but for some time he limited it to 4, but sometimes he also unlimited it again. But when you looked at his real life, it had a certain gravity toward these 2, the first one and then the last one, and so on. So the issue, we had this Thomas More, thing. Remember, we read this part of the Utopia there, where premarital sex was forbidden, and the utopians punished people by forbidding them ever to get married again. That was the punishment for having premarital sex. The question is, what the critical theorists would argue, what are the presuppositions of this? Why do people do this? So when you take, for instance, the matriarchal thing, and you see the unbelievable strictness of Roman law in terms of patriarchal law, the husband can sell his wife on the slave market. He can kill her, doesn't have to go to court. He can do the same thing to his children and so on. Then you have to ask dialectically what this is directed against. It is directed against something, and of course what is directed against is against that what has been overcome, namely the matriarchal period before. So in order to make sure that this matriarchal thing will not rise again, you make these strict laws and so on. So therefore, when people say you shouldn't have premarital sex, there must be something what they are protecting, or a certain anthropological presupposition. And the presupposition is that we are not monogamic by nature, but that we are polygamic. So if you then want to stress monogamy, they argue that premarital sex would strengthen that polygamic element, and that when they later on get together, they will not be able to live monogamically. That means there will be divorces and so on. Now, that is what Habermas would call an intuition, or what the older philosophers called an insight. When you compare this with empirical studies now, and we become really modern, then we would say that there are people who have premarital sex, and then their marriages last. And we have people who have no premarital sex, and their marriages break down. So it would be interesting for a modern statistician or so to see, what the real relationship is. If one could say, the more premarital relations you have, the less your monogamy will last, the less chance it has to last. Or the less you have, the longer it will last. But is it really, can we do that really empirically? We don't know what will the result be. But it would be interesting to take these old types of intuitions or so, or insights, may not be entirely ungrounded in reality. They may have seen something, but for us today to be certain, we would have to make it an empirical project and then see if they were right or not, and then either hold on to it or abandon it or so. So, nevertheless, that was another side show there, which is not actual now. What the Pope has problems with at the moment is this condom business there. And he not only said, the condom will not work, he even said the condom makes it only worse. And that, of course, upset, so it's not the Africans who are upset. Who is upset are all the people from the UN who want to help the Africans. That means that these are high-tech people, and they have no other means to stop the epidemic. The epidemic comes from the chimpanzees. The AIDS was developed among the ape population, and then it spread over to the human ones, and the apes don't die from it. We do, but they don't. So maybe we can take that for a moment and do a diagnosis of it, and then also a prognosis, as a critical theorist would do, who has this whole development behind. What can a critical theorist say about this thing? First of all, we have to have all the data, so then we have only half of it. The Pope has a visit, and so suddenly all that flares up. We see, I think one would, as a critical theorist, one would have to see what the consciousness of these modern people are, the helpers, who say we have to spread condoms. They could also say we should spread these cocktails, which we have developed, of medicine, which today keeps a lot of our patients alive for quite a long time. But probably they are too expensive to be spread, over the continent, and nobody is willing to pay for it. So, therefore, the condom is some kind of a cheaper means, to do something at all. So, so this is the type of functional type of mentality, and we understand that quite well. So I think by inclination we would right away agree with the medical doctors and the medical community and the scientists and so on. Yes, there's the problem, that's the epidemic, and the means which you take, is this instrumental rationality. It is, of course, so we invent some kind of instrument and so on. The Pope does not think instrumentally, so how in God's name does he think? And for us, and that would be, if Habermas reads Thomas, he is able to reconstruct the consciousness of Thomas now. Can we reconstruct the consciousness of the Pope? How this man is thinking, and why he comes to such strange different conclusions than we would as modern people. He is not a modern man, even when he flies in a helicopter, it doesn't make him a modern person. He is with the church fathers, with the Greek and the Roman church fathers. That's what he has studied. That is the world in which he lives. So, but how does he think? What kind of psychology is behind his thinking? What kind of an ethics is behind that? And so, ethics, if we start out with this, it's a natural law ethics. It comes from the Stoics, and it has been baptized by the Christians, by the Orthodoxy, and by the Romans, by the Roman church fathers. So, do we have that? Do we know what that is? No, we don't have it. So, there is no trace left in this country of the natural law position, except in Roman Catholic parishes. So, if you go to a Roman Catholic priest, he will probably be the only one who automatically, follows this natural law position. We have another natural law, which is the bourgeois natural law, which was developed in the 18th century, and our Constitution follows that kind of a natural law. What is the difference between the two? The old natural law presupposes a universal human nature. That means that we all have the same inclinations and so on. The bourgeois natural law starts from the individual. That means the empirical individual and his or her inclinations. That can make a great difference. For instance, if you take the old natural law, you say man has an inclination to live. Therefore, they build on that psychology and ethics. Therefore, he has the right to life. There you have the right to life thing. And therefore, he has a duty to live, and therefore no stem cell thing or whatever. But what every modern man will say right away is, but there are so many, think of Turkhan, there are so many suicides all the time. So the others would say, well, this is sinful deviation or whatever. But modern people will say, obviously, not everybody has this will to life all the time. Some people want to die, like the Gordian, and so on. And on Freud, and not only a few, lots of people. I mean, I'm called to the Catholic hospital there again and again where somebody wants to commit suicide and is afraid will go to hell, So what do you do with those people? And when I took the class over, we discussed that issue too. So that is the difference between the two. So that means you have, in the Pope, you have a natural law position which says there are four inclinations in human nature. One is the will to live. And therefore, everybody has the right to life, and then everybody has the duty to live, which right away regulates a lot of things. So you cannot commit suicide. You have the duty to live, So this can also be applied to a whole nation, for instance. Also, a nation has the right to life. And if you have a leadership which ruins the nation, or you think it does, then tyrannicide is possible. So tyrannicide is part of the natural law, and it has been used by Stauffenberg. I told you that Stauffenberg went from one confession to the other, and all the priests told him to kill Hitler means killing. You cannot kill somebody. Until he found a Jesuit, and the Jesuit could still remember the natural law, and that the natural law is also valid for whole nations. And he agreed and said, yes, Hitler is ruining the country, so you can remove him. And the same thing happened, in Israel with this young law student who is still in prison there, who killed, assassinated the president because he thought that the land for peace would ruin the state of Israel, and therefore you could do away with him. And I think that Sirico, also applied this. Unfortunately, my article, I didn't go enough into the medieval stuff there because it said they didn't have enough room or so. But I think Sirico thinks the same way, that Chavez, ruins the country, Venezuela, and therefore he should be removed. Of course, Chavez is not exactly a tyrant and whatever, but if you paint him that way, then you can apply that medieval natural law position. So the next inclination is the right to, first of all, that we have an inclination to have a family. And there's the same thing again, some people do not have the inclination to have a family. So if you think we all have the same human nature, you will have the protests of people say, well, I don't feel that way. But according to the old natural law, everybody is inclined to marry, therefore you have the right to marry, and therefore you have the duty to marry. In order to introduce the celibacy, they had to suspend this. That means every priest has the right to marry, but he makes a promise that he will not take advantage of this right. But if he wants to get out of it, the church has no way then to allow him to get out of it, because the natural law is above the church law. And so, but then they treat him very badly, and that is very inconsequential, because they have to know that the natural law gives him the permission to marry and gives him the right to marry and even the duty to marry, and that if he makes that promise and puts the promise back, the natural law is the most important orientation point.
Natural law, church law, human law.
Right. So they are. So the God's law, is the most superior one. Now that can be in the Word of God, which would mean then the Decalogue and the Sermon on the Mount, or it can be found in nature itself, because nature presupposes an intelligence, and therefore nature is constructed intelligently, and so the will of this intelligent divinity is expressed everywhere in the purposiveness and rationality of the universe and so on. So we have this second thing, this inclination, and then there is a third one, the inclination to find the truth. But it is not the historical truth or the truth of quantum physics, at least not alone, but it is the absolute truth which is to be found. That means the theological truth. And so from a natural law point of view, our universities, which are secular and which are neutral to metaphysical and religious questions, prevent the students really from pursuing this, because we are not allowed to discuss theological questions in the secular campus. Even our religion department is not allowed to discuss theological questions. And the student can go to the ACLU and can protest, and the whole thing has to be closed down. My predecessor, Father Harden, the Jesuit, who was fired before I came or after I came, he did this. So, and then the fourth one would be the inclination to have friends, and the right to have friends, not to be isolated, not to be excommunicated or whatever, and the duty to cultivate friendships. So these would be the four things. So this is one little piece, from which we are cut off in a certain way, because it is a Greek way to think. And we mentioned already that we are the result of three forms of de-Hellenization: the Reformation as a Protestant country, the Revolution, the French Revolution, as a bourgeois country, and at the moment multiculturalism. All three forms de-Hellenize. So we are cut off from this. We cannot possibly understand what that Pope says there. We can also say the Pope is an Aristotelian, like Thomas Aquinas. So as we know that for Plato, the universal was above the particular in the mind of the God, and for Aristotle, the universal was in the particular, and for us, the universal is in our head, and there is no universality in the reality outside of ourselves. We impose that on them, the categories of species and all this, in order to make order around us, but they are not in the tree itself like it was for Aristotle and so on. So all these things, that we are nominalists, and that he is what's called a realist, or Plato an idealist or whatever, creates worlds of distance between us. So that means when we look at a story like this, we have to reflect on our own consciousness and how it is structured, and we have to reflect on his consciousness as well, as he looks at things like this African situation. So underlying there is a certain psychology now, that means these inclinations are part of the psychology, but when the Pope says people should should restrain from sex. That means instead of using the condom, they should not have sex at all. Then this is another thing which we don't understand, because the whole theory of virtue has gone to pieces. But before I say this, in terms of his ontology, he presupposes, like Hegel still did, that reason governs the world and that providence governs the world. So a Greek and a Hebrew answer to that question. That means condoms, why are they wrong? Why is a condom a mortal sin? How would somebody get to this strange idea? It's unfathomable for a modern man why a condom should be. If you were a Taoist, if you were a Lao Tzu or Confucius person, you would understand him. And the interesting thing is, that Tao, the way or reason, was thematized by the Chinese. But if once in a religion something has been thematized, made into a theme, it never gets lost again. It may move into the background, but it stays. In the same way, it's true that things which are potentially there in an earlier religion, like in Judaism, for instance, may then be thematized in Christianity. And we mentioned that things already. For instance, don't be afraid, was thematized in Christianity and then was taken over by the Enlightenment, because the definition of Enlightenment is to free people from their fears and to make them into masters of their fate. So, nevertheless, for the Pope, the condom is a sin because it interferes with the purposiveness of sexuality, or with the purposiveness of nature in general. So there is an intelligence presupposed, and therefore everything in this world is purposive, and every organ in our body is purposive, and so is also the sexuality. So if on one side you commit this act and you block it at the same time by a condom, then you are not only violating the rationality of this organ or this arrangement, but of the intelligence, of divine intelligence as such. A mortal sin means then you separate yourself from this, what is called the ground of being, or the ultimate reality, and so on, and so that constitutes the sin, this separation, and so on. So this is a type of thinking. Religious people do have a system in their madness. That means there is a logic at work in their argument. I mean, the Pope is personally not a stupid man. So, therefore, if you are part of this system, everything follows from everything in a very logical way. But if you are outside of this, and you are centuries further removed from it, it sounds then irrational. And that is responsible for this antagonism. I think the critical theorists are people who take these antagonisms very seriously. A positivist is somebody who does not think in contradictions, process in contradictions. That is the great difference between a critical theorist and a positivist in all forms and whatever. There are always new ones coming up. Okay, so, but then, so that was the one thing why that is sinful, and why he thinks, that when people do that, it makes it only worse because of the ethical disaster involved. Also, a reason why he thinks the condom makes it worse is that, of course, the condoms do not work 100%. And the condom may seduce people to have more sex. They think it is safe now, and therefore they become more sexually active. And at the same time, it is not so safe as they think. And then, of course, the casualties may be increased by the condom. But now, one more thing. That means we have that in Malthus. Malthus was the priest who invented that thing that the reproduction of the species goes on in 2, 4, 8, 16, and so on. And the food supply 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, until Fritz Haber changed that by doubling the food supply. Then Malthus was wrong, but it was for 100 years he was right. Now that since Fritz Haber is wrong, so Malthus and the Pope, think instead of instrumental rationality, you use an external instrument, the condom or so. They rather think that the ego should develop certain habits by which it would be able to regulate the world. That means there is a materialistic scientific solution to it, and there is an idealistic solution which comes from inside, from the consciousness. So what does that look like? Well, there are those cardinal virtues. The whole theory of virtue has completely been demolished. Any attempt after the Second World War to restore it again, but Max Scheler tried to restore it too, has failed. So, because it hangs together, with the Aristotelian type of thinking and realism, and so our empirical psychology cannot come to that. But a virtue is nothing else than a habit. So the first habit would be prudence. That means to treat all people all things according to their objective structure. That means you may conform the structure of your consciousness with the structure of this other human being, your lover or family or whatever. That is what prudence means. So to get a habit means you don't have to mobilize, this idea what is prudence every time when something happens. If it becomes a habit, it goes almost automatically. That means you will automatically act prudently. It becomes part of your character. And this virtue of prudence is rooted in the intellect. So there is again a psychological presupposition. We consist of the intellect, of the will, of the irascible power, the rage, the anger, the killer instinct, and the concupiscible type of the libido, the sexuality, and so on. And the system of virtues is rooted in this type of psychology. So you develop in your intellect a habit to act continually prudently. You develop in your will a certain habit to be just. That means to give to everybody what is owed to him or her, which presupposes, of course, your knowledge to know what human nature is, and so on, and then act accordingly. And then now comes the point there about, let's see, a question. This type of Nicomachean and so on ethics does not want you to repress your anger. So we have a psychologist over there, a wonderful friend of mine, and he has a little machine there. When he gets angry, he pushes a button, and that hurts him. And then he slowly conditions him not to be mean, not to be angry, and so on. Whenever he feels the anger rising, he pushes that little button. And then he starts smiling, and is in good shape, and so on. So he does that since 30 years, as long as I know him. And he walks around like Francis of Assisi, really a wonderful person. But, there is, the Aristotle would argue that there is a purpose for aggression. Why you have to be aggressive sometimes. So they are not for the repression, but that you become angry in conformity to prudence and to justice. So that when you get angry, you do not violate justice, and you do not act imprudently. And this virtue then is called fortitude. So the fortitude means that you develop the habit to become angry in conformity with the law of prudence and with justice. But you can very well get angry. So, if you hear about these bonuses, and you don't get angry, then there's something wrong with you. If you go to the other side of the railroad station and you see the slums, where 10,000 of people cannot develop their humanity and die before that has happened, if you don't get angry, there's something is wrong with you, And so in 100 cases or so. So one should get angry, but one should get angry in a prudent and in a just way. And the same thing, and here we come to the Pope now, as far as the exercise of sexuality. It's not to repress sexuality, but it is rather to channel it in such a way that as you act sexually, you will not become unfair, unjust, and so on, or imprudent, that you don't look at the consequences, and so on. And so what he's talking about is that he presupposes that human beings can develop this type of habit in them. But that presupposes, and so far these things go, it presupposes a certain interpretation of what the fall of man is. So all Christians have this idea that Adam and Eve did not only, and that's different from the Muslims and from the Jews, that they did not only act as persons, as individuals, but that they disqualified the human nature, so that children are born with this disqualified, rotten type of a human nature, and therefore need baptism, which is not the case for Jews. The circumcision is not the purpose of it. So baptism means that this disqualification of the human nature is removed. And the Protestants have, as purifiers from pagan elements, they have even radicalized this. So that means the intellect and the will are not only damaged, like for Catholics, but have been completely destroyed. So in that sense, you have in Luther, that reason is a whore. That means a radical fideism. You have to emphasize faith because reason doesn't work. And everything is fundamentally grace. That means you cannot do anything good out of yourself. And therefore it would help, that you think you do something good for a coed, but in reality you want to sleep with her, and so on. So that means the hidden motivations, which Freud would call that, that could be a translation, of what the Christians meant originally with those things. So, nevertheless, when we hear somebody talk, when a critical theist hears somebody talking, he has to see, what the mindset of this man is. That doesn't mean he agrees with anything of what he does, but what he owes him is to understand his position, where he is coming from, and why he says these things. And then he will see, can apply, of course, inner criticism, and can say that the Pope is at odds, with his own worldview, for instance. That is possible, So if people, for instance, think there is the inclination to life and the right to life, why then he, who was the great inquisitor of the Roman Catholic Church in the last 20 years, and therefore is part of the Holy Inquisition, and the Holy Inquisition did torture people, did burn people on the stake, and so on, and in that violated the natural law, and not only in this rational form, but also in the biblical form. That means the Decalogue and so on. And these two, by the way, are supposed to agree with each other, so that there is no antagonism between faith and reason. The antagonism between faith and reason, or faith and science, and so on, is a modern thing. And so there is another issue, why the Pope does not yield anything, because he said, you produced that whole split. It wasn't me, it was you. And you are responsible for this, and you have to think differently, because you deviated from our wonderful synthesis, which we had under Thomas Aquinas and so on. So, okay, so that shows, how one could make a diagnosis, and out of the diagnosis and the prognosis would develop too, because he prognosticates too. He would say, if you continue, to approach this problem that way, you will only make it worse. And what the other side says, the scientist, is, if we follow you, who resisted all progress which we made, and you fought all these rearguard struggles against Newton and Galileo and Darwin and Marx and Freud and so on, and you lost all rearguard struggles, so your credibility is close to zero. So why there should we follow your advice now? So this is, the credibility loss of all the religions, so that practically only among uneducated people, that means who cannot remember what has happened, who cannot remember higher criticism against the revelations and so on. My article about Revelation, it has just been taken there by the University of Munich. They took it. It was too long, but they take it anyway. So for Gottfried Künstler, who is one of our professors there, was in our course in Dubrovnik all these years. So I wrote this in his honor. So now we have a split in the prognosis too, because each of them says the opposite. If we follow science, it will only get worse, or if we follow your religious thing with your low credibility, we are really in a mess, So, and there it is. What we said there is what the critical theorists, what Habermas and so on would say is, now not to shout back and forth, you damned naturalist, you ruin all morality, and and you obscurantists there in the dark Middle Ages, coming with these idiotic things, which we have long overcome, that would not help in any way. So one has to see what one has in common, and that both, of course, would like to get rid of AIDS, without doubt. So it is not a question of the goal, which they have in common. The Pope wants to get rid of AIDS, and the other one too. So one would have to start out with that, what they have in common, and then one would see that the means by which that is achieved is really the problem. But we don't know, how to prognosticate now. Sometimes epidemics like that, just die out suddenly. That's one thing, if you leave it to nature and enough people are killed, nobody will kill anymore, it stops or whatever. So, but I don't think that anybody speculates that way, because it's increasing, really. We have it somewhat under control here, and it is not only in the homosexual community, but it has spread in other communities as well. So, okay. So,
in this instance, we also have the other side. If the Pope is speaking in Africa, from what I've heard, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, that many of the African congregations among Catholicism are the most conservative, and that especially with the social issues, probably much more anti-gay than many are here. Although there's a lot of anti-gay bigotry here. So the Pope can go to Africa and say, no immoral use of the condom, blah, blah, blah. Is it part that he knows that he's going to have a very receptive audience among the Catholic laity? Among the more conservative flock there.
Yeah. But I think, the way I know him personally, and I don't think that he thinks that way. He doesn't think in that pragmatic way. So he would not think, I have to go to Africa now, and they are very conservative people, therefore I can play that conservative game or whatever. He simply has that conservative game, and he plays it no matter what.
Okay.
I think that is probably, the stubborn type of a thing.
You'll probably tell him that the Pope plagiarized you.
That's typical. He has a few sentences on the Frankfurt school, and but the sentences are very important because he makes clear, what the difference is between the Frankfurt school and the. First of all, he has appreciation. I mean, he thinks highly. He praises them. They quoted from already in other encyclicals before. And they have this contact with Habermas and so on. So, but the issue is the critical theory has these two roots. One is the second and the third commandment of Moses, not to make images of the absolute or name the absolute, and the other one is the Kantian idea of the thing in itself or the things in themselves. So Kant forbids to penetrate the sphere of the thing in itself. And somehow the Mosaic law does the same thing. So you could say in its foundations the critical theory combines the Kantian Enlightenment with the Mosaic background. Yeah, I think one can put it that way. But you had another question, right?
Space Salvi?
Yeah, okay. So now, if one obeys those two things, the attitude is the following thing, that one can say that Christianity progressed beyond Judaism and has become superior by, I mentioned that already, don't fear, by the emphasis on love, dissolving law, really, love and do what you want to, Augustine would say, and you do the right thing. So in these points, Christianity is superior. But they would argue that Christianity has to pay a price for this. So the critical theory always asks for the price. So they would say about the pill encyclical, Humanae Vitae, and so on. The capitalists put, the workers on the pill, and since that time everybody had produced himself once, so everybody has 2 children and so on. So the Frankfurt school would say this is real progress, because now people are in control of their lives, they don't have more children than they can afford and so on. But at the same time they ask, what kind of a price you have to pay for this. And the price is quite horrendous. The argument is not like the Pope now, a monotheistic one, but it's a psychoanalytical one. That means fundamentally behind all love there is the sexuality, the organic type of sexuality, the instinct and so on. In that sense it is materialistic. So that means all forms of love are forms of sublimation of this fundamental sexual instinct. That means the transformation or the sublimation takes place only through a taboo. So only insofar as this raw sexual instinct, as every chimpanzee has it, and as we have it, only to the extent to which it is tabooed, let's see, by the most original ethical law, namely the incest taboo, to that extent it is sublimated, and now the derivative type of forms of love can come about, love of the father to the children, or to even in monogamy to the wife and so on. So then, maybe we are polygamic, but now you sublimate it in such a way that you can live a monogamic life and can remain faithful to one wife for 50 years. So all the forms of love are forms of sublimation. So, but what works as a taboo? And Horkheimer would say that the fear of pregnancy, for instance, acted somehow as a taboo. And so, therefore, because of that fear and because of this taboo, then sublimation took place and romantic love was developed. That means an exclusive type of erotic love. And out of this came tremendous cultural advantages. So that somebody, for instance, after the death of the partner, does not right away get married. With this Thomas More guy, he married again 3 months after his wife had died. And the argument would then be, that is not a very ethical way to do it. In spite of the fact that the man had a problem, had a big household and a lot of children, and he, so needed some kind of a housekeeper and married somebody just to have a housekeeper. So, but what Horkheimer is afraid is that when this taboo of fear of pregnancy falls away, then erotic love will die. And out of this erotic love came not only the remembrance of the dead partner, but also artistic expressions, symphonies, theaters, and so on. That means all higher culture, philosophy, theology, and so on, was produced. And so what he was afraid of is that the price for the pill was the death of romantic love. And now here we have again an intuition. And it would be interesting to make that into an empirical research project if that really happens. What does really happen after a generation or 2 or 3 people being on the pill? Does it kill romantic love? Or do they still go on putting little hearts into the trees, or writing poetry, or do they stop writing poetry, or singing songs with the mandolin there standing under the window, as they did in Mozart's, play there, Giovanni or whatever. So
I think that stopped.
Well, we should not be too hasty now,
Maybe Dustin.
Even against the Horkheimer and the Frankfurt School, one should ask, if this is really empirically true. And I think that would create all kinds of empirical research projects, because somebody may very well say, I'm on the pill, for 50 years, but I still love my wife, and even monogamically,
I want that pill.
Yeah. So therefore, I think one should be careful and not simply right away agree with that. It's the same case what we had before. So nevertheless, that is so. And therefore, there was an agreement came about suddenly between Horkheimer and Paul II and Paul VI, and so the whole left wing was horribly upset, all over Germany, what had happened to the old man, was he become pious or what? And that is why Habermas is running around now and said, I have become old but not pious, because the suspicion of pious people, that unpious people become pious when they move toward their death. So Habermas is reacting against this and wants to make sure that everybody knows it, that he has not become pious and that he is still religiously totally unmusical. And no matter how old he becomes, this becomes funny too. I mean, if you really press the point. Okay, so we had this thing there, and we tried to make it clear to us what that means to do a time diagnosis or prognosis by using that African example there. So, but we could take, when the homosexuality came up there, because that is on his program too, obviously. Let's reconstruct that for a moment, So we have these people who say, gay marriage and all this is another part of the culture war. I mean, every day another culture war comes up, And that may be closely related with the stem cell thing there. So let's take... Oh, I think somebody... wants to have the test there.
Thank you.
Okay, let's shortly approach that stem cell thing. So,
did you want to talk to him, or
no, it's okay, right?
No, that's perfect. I was just going to see if you could sign this.
I'm glad to sign it.
Okay. Here,
whatever it is.
Thank you very much.
Okay, very good. And you take it again? You take it with you?
Yes. I'm going to just take. It's just your permission, more or less, to get into a summer course.
Yeah. Which one do you want to go into it? There is summer 1 and summer 2.
1.
Yeah, but that may be the same class which you have now.
Greek through 4?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Is ethics 2?
I think it is 2. Yeah. I don't know exactly. Now, I thought I had psychological elements in summer 1 and the other one in summer 2.
Okay. I think it might be summer 2 actually.
Yeah. So I signed it. Okay.
Perfect.
And you can then do what you want to do with it.
Okay.
Okay, very good.
Thanks a lot, Professor.
Yes, you're welcome. I'm glad you found it.
Okay.
So just give me the test a week from today, okay?
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, so you have enough time, right?
Okay, you have a nice night.
Very good. Okay. Okay, let's do the same analysis about. So a few days ago, Obama made clear that he wants to do the following thing. He thinks that science has been politicized. So that falls right away in the public sphere, ideas of Habermas and so on. It has been politicized. So, do we have a...
Sorry.
Okay. On the other hand, we could also say that, the people who are against the stem cell thing also don't want to have it politicized. But as soon as you open up, in the public sphere, a discourse, it is very likely that in one way or the other it becomes politicized. So now the Bush administration was against that stem cell thing, but in a strange way. First of all, not in principle, but the president said one could use embryos which would be discarded anyway, which was a limited amount of embryos which could be used. A complication which comes in is that Clinton went on television a day or so before, on television, and repeated 5 times, I didn't think I heard right, that the American people would agree to that if they would know that the embryo would not be fertilized and that therefore no baby would come from it. I mean, he always had problems with sex. I mean, he could not differentiate between a blowjob and real sex. What sex is, or whatever. And now he is really in deep water. An embryo is the first 8 weeks after fertilization. No embryo is fertilized. the egg is fertilized and it develops into an embryo, and then the fetus development starts in higher organisms, including ourselves.
Rudy, where were you 10 years ago? You could have told him all of that.
Yeah, I should have. Yeah, I don't know. But
we were all in this class when.
Really?
Yeah. We were also the first time he used. We were in the McGovern campaign. He was too, but everybody in the McGovern campaign knew what sex was. I mean, something wrong with him. Something
or else they wouldn't have been in the McGovern campaign.
Something has gone wrong with this guy. So, no less. Okay, so that cannot convince the American people because they were just nonsense sentences. And I don't know, maybe he said his hands were shaking and he went to the doctor for Alzheimer's, but thanks be to God he doesn't have any Alzheimer's. But he said this only because it has something to do with this problem. And the problem is, these stem cells we can use in order to heal Alzheimer's and diabetes and so on. So that's the problem. Okay, so we have the president now clear on the secular side. With the Bush, it was wishy-washy. On one side, he was a little bit religious, and on the other side, his party in California spent millions of dollars for research, stem cell research, while he, in Washington, on the federal level, they said no to some extent, and on the state level, they did it anyway. And if they wouldn't do it, then they would do it in Japan, or they would do it in Canada, or whatever. So, what that shows us is, of course, another thesis of the critical theory, namely that secularization cannot be stopped. So, it was definitely a victory of secularization. And so, we said that 100 times before, that what these neoconservative people are doing is they give hope to the fundamentalists that their agenda could be realized, in spite of the fact that this is intrinsically not possible because this presidency is a secular affair. And so all what they can do is to create the impression among the fundamentalist population that they could maybe realize some part of their agenda, knowing very well they can't, and then they get the votes together. And then when they are in office, of course, with Reagan or Nixon or whatever, it doesn't work. And the fundamentalist people are then horribly disappointed, and you can see that they voted twice in the federal elections for Bush, and then when the state election came up, they had been disappointed and withdrew, and right away the president lost on the state level. So, but that is repeated all the time. And one wonders, when these religious people, millions of Catholics and evangelicals, know that this is not a religious country, that this never was a religious country, that it never was a Christian country, or whatever. So, therefore, thinks that both parties are totally secular, but one party always does this, or tries to do that religious thing, the other side does it less. The Democrats also do it sometimes, but less than the other side. But otherwise, the situation is clear now, because the president has made an entirely secular type of a decision. But now the question is, how can we reconstruct what these religious people are all about? Again, we can say, in terms of discourse, both sides want to heal Alzheimer's, both want to heal diabetes and so on, so that they have in common. So what do they not have in common, or what else do they have in common? I think both sides know that the embryo is not a chimpanzee embryo. It's only a 2 or 3% difference between the genome of a chimpanzee and human beings. We are very close, and the chimpanzee is much further away from the orangutan than it is from us, so it's very close. But these 2 or 3% are decisive. So most natural scientists would say that the human embryo or the human fetus is different from the other one. So the humanity of the fetus. But that's where it stops now, the agreement. Because the issue is that fetus a person, or is this embryo a person? Because the new religious teaching is that it is a person from the moment of conception, which was not the case for Thomas Aquinas there, where the conception, where the personhood came 3 months after the conception. But even then, Thomas Aquinas would not allow abortion or stem cell research in the first 3 months, because the body would be the possible receptacle for the soul, as they did not allow anatomy later on because even after the soul left the body, of course, had been the house of the soul, and therefore could not be taken apart. Now, all these are metaphysical arguments, by the way, and what people say, what the secular side says, these guys make metaphysical statements, and behind that is that we are in a post-metaphysical age. There is a book by Habermas, Post-Metaphysical Age. We are in a post-metaphysical age, and you cannot make, in this post-metaphysical age, metaphysical statements. It sounds ridiculous. So the doctors would say, well, God is sitting in the wombs of 10 million American women and puts a little soul into every fertilized egg or whatever. And then they laugh themselves to death. Make a joke, So that is what happens, when you talk in a post-metaphysical age, metaphysically. But I think, when they came together in Frankfurt and had their seminars, there was Haag, a fellow called Haag. He came from Karl-Heinz Haag. He came from the Jesuit seminary, and he was there. He was an assistant of Adorno, and he was sitting there. He spoke Greek and Latin, which the professors didn't. And so he was responsible for telling them what the church fathers had taught, what the scholastics had taught, and so on, so that they would be well informed. And then there was another one, Smith, who was responsible for Marxism, historical materialism. So they continually asked those people as they were discussing, are we on the right track? But the important thing, not only did they want to be well informed about what historical materialism is, they also wanted to be well informed about what the religious traditions had to say to all of these things. So, and I think that openness should remain, and we should not cancel it. So the question is, what do they have in common? What do they not have in common? The issue that this embryo or this fetus is a person, that is the jumping point. Because for Reagan, it was not only a person, it was a citizen. So in one case, somebody killed by kicking a woman, the embryo, and for Reagan, that he killed an American citizen and was supposed to be punished like this. Now that is metaphysics.
Constitutionally, that's citizen until birth.
Yes, and that's in the court case before Roe versus Wade that they point to.
Did what? Yeah.
Not a citizen until birth, constitutionally.
Yeah, okay, but not for Reagan, right? And not for those people. So,
Constitution doesn't work for Reagan.
Now, but we have to explain this a little bit more now about, and there comes, Habermas and Byrd and all these people, that the subjectivity is the result of intersubjectivity. That means only as the fetus then comes out, then by the interaction and with the mother and the mother's breast, and then the taking away from the breast, the separation, and slowly the ego develops on one side in opposition to reality. A reality which does not yield to the instincts anymore. And so this differentiation between the ego and the environment, that means the nurses and so on, and then inside, the ego differentiates itself from the id, that means from the inner chimpanzees. The chimpanzee, the instinct, the libidinous instinct, the sexual and the aggressive instinct, it screams all over the place. Some withdrawal happens from the bottle or whatever. And then also when the commandments are coming, the commands are coming, don't go to the door or don't fall down there or do that in the toilet or whatever, but then of course the superego differentiates itself off. So since only slowly, as a result of intersubjectivity, the differentiation takes place in the subject itself. So that is where this discourse stands at this moment. If not science evolves further, or the religious people evolve further. And there was an indication, that science had evolved further by saying we can also take the stem cells from an adult hand or foot or whatever. But it remains true that the stem cell, which is taken from the embryo, not the fetus, but the first weeks, that this is not yet differentiated. And that this undifferentiated stem cell can then be injected into the spine or into the brain and so on. And since it is not predisposed yet, differentiated enough, it fits better. And so it is still true that this undifferentiated embryo stem cell is much better than any cell which they can get from a later organism. So therefore, it has not evolved any further. But there could be a theoretical evolution of science, namely, if science would discover that when they threw out the causa finalis in the 18th century, that maybe they have gone a little bit too far. That means that not everything in nature can be explained by mechanical causes, but that there is a certain purposiveness in there. When they observe a bird going up there and not eating the grass, but putting the grass between two branches, and so they can see the carrying it up, the lifting it up, and so on, the mechanical cause, but they cannot see any final purposiveness or so. And the scientist wants to be certain, and therefore he has to see it step by step. And if he cannot see anything, then if you say, well, a little bird is obviously programmed, then he says, obviously, it's not so obvious that it's programmed. So they sacrifice the truth for certainty. There's a certain tendency. So in psychology, that's very strong. And Freud is a behaviorist, and Skinner is a behaviorist, but Skinner cannot have introspection. He doesn't trust his introspection. He trusts the outside, the rat in the Skinner box, and the electrodes and so on. But as soon as it goes inside, he is not aware. Carl Gustav Jung and so on still has very strongly this introspection. It is also not direct, it's by inference. That means what Jung discovers in fairy tales and in mythology and so on becomes an indicator that there is something else in the psyche. Then there's something else in the body, there's something else in the psyche, which also can announce itself by the lie detector, for instance. You can suddenly, the hands get sweaty or the blood pressure goes up and so on. As soon as it is this immediacy, this immediate certitude which they are looking for. And where this immediate certitude is not there, for instance with that little bird, you are not so certain that this bird anticipates the nest and the eggs and the little ones coming out and so on, because nothing is visible. All what you see is he lifts up the grass, and you can measure all this too. That's important. They are measure fanatics, so they have to measure it all, how heavy it is and how fast it goes, and so on and so on. Yes.
But even the certitude, like with the lie detector test, it only measures fight or flight response to the body. Then that has to be interpreted. So that what it's measuring is simply that the body's reacting to. For what reason? They still have to ask. They still have to inference or whatnot.
And therefore, sometimes they slow it out, and sometimes they accept it, and so on, right?
But in this, you said scientists sacrifice truth for certainty, isn't it? I mean, where we get logical positivism from?
Yeah, right.
In the sense that, there's no certainty in the metaphysical speculation or whatever, therefore you can't say anything about it. And all that is valid is that which can be measured.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
And that which cannot.
And then, that leads to the differentiation between the Frankfurt school and the New School, or the Frankfurt school and the Vienna school. That is what these schools are all about, and why they have a hard time to discuss with each other. With the Frankfurt, how come I went to the New School and gave talks sometimes, but they did not have a real discourse with each other. And there was no real discourse with the Vienna school neither. Also between Lenin and the Mach and so on, there was no real discourse. It is very hard, to mediate among those schools. But one should try it anyway, because where there is no discourse, there's war. This is true for the intellectual work as well. And so, therefore, Habermas, has that great genius. He wrote a book together with Luhmann, where he got together with a positivist, and they wrote a book together, So, I think that is how it ought to be. And the older guys, Horkheimer and Adorno did not have, they never talked with Parsons, So it was the next generation which did that. So, and that is what one should follow. Okay, so if then, for instance, science would, and Huxley does that, the biologist, could bring back this teleological idea, then one could say that it is true that, in a certain sense, subjectivity is the result of intersubjectivity, But it can only be the result because there is already potential there in that human organism, which is not there in the chimpanzee organism. But so far, the potentiality, or the tendency or so, cannot be verified so well as the other thing, namely the effects which that intersubjectivity has. And that is a problem where it gets stuck. Then one has to agree to disagree in the culture war. And for a moment one has to say, well, we have to work hard on both sides in order to move ahead. And so if you say, of course, a religious man is a dogmatic character and he can never change and so on, then you just have to reflect on the, on the historical process, and you see how much they have changed, The usury laws have been changed in Catholicism. The torture was accepted once, that has been changed. Slavery was accepted up to the Second Vatican Council, and that has been changed. The death penalty was acceptable morally, and that has been changed. It changes all the time. So where does this impression come that they don't change? Well, they produce it. Because if you would say, no, I cannot have birth control now, this is a hard sacrifice, not to have artificial birth control, but why should I do that sacrifice when for 40 years from now they will probably change it anyway? So as soon as you make the norms, as changeable, then people will say, why should we conform to something which is so changeable, It is just, the guys, religious people are slow learners, so they always come, 50 years too late or 100 years, and so why should I do all these sacrifices when I can anticipate very easily that they will change again, And that was the reason for Paul VI, not to change the birth control issue. He said, we have taught that for 2,000 years. And what will people say when we change this suddenly? They will all lose their faith, he thought. Well, they lost their faith because he did not change it. That was the issue. He did not anticipate it adequately. So, but it means also that the faithful ones have to learn, have to mature, that one does not have to make that pretense that is unchangeable, but that one knows, that everything evolves, including religious dogmas, and it's very easy to see that this is so. So it is a matter, if they want to remain children, father says, sister says, and so on, which is a childlike attitude, that means one would have to tell religious people to grow up. So that, that would mean already to come closer to each other if both sides would have this, And then also something which Fromm, emphasized. The question is Freud less religious than Jung is? So Jung travels to Africa and to India and so on, and studies all these religions. So he seems to be bombastically religious. But his father was a Protestant minister in Switzerland, and so on and so on. So everybody prejudges, C.G. Jung is a pious man, and Freud was an atheist or whatever. But it depends now. The principle of Freud was where id is, ego should be. And if Fromm, for instance, he has a reconstruction of the Hebrew Bible, in a very radical way, he will show that this motif where ego is, where id is, ego should be. That means tendencies to demythologization, to de-demonization, to taming the God, or that the God tames himself by entering covenants, I will not drown them anymore like white mice and so on and so on, And when he gets angry, he annihilates the whole Egyptian army, and then he annihilates all the 5 cities, and the Dead Sea, and so on, with all the children in it, and so on. So slowly the God goes through a civilization process. Or the principle of where id is, that is the angry one. That is the mysterium fascinosum, but also the How much time do we have? We want to see our movie too, right? Yeah. And what do we have? What is the movie?
Are we still working on Bonhoeffer?
Bonhoeffer, yeah.
Or should we?
I think it was still Bonhoeffer, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Is it there? Do you see Bonhoeffer there?
Yes, I got it.
Okay. Then we put it in a little bit later. Okay, here is the paper of Elizabeth, and I want to give it back. Elizabeth says here...
You waiting to cook her or something?
What?
So you got all excited. So you waiting to cook her or something?
No. I don't care her thoughts.
We all read Margaret II.
Don't worry.
Okay, the critical theory of society as it has been developed by the Institute and so on. Frankfurt School at its core fundamentally seeks emancipation from human suffering. Is that true? I think it is true. That means they are concerned with the theodicy problem, also where they don't use that word. It goes through the whole thing. They said they were even ashamed, that the others had to die and that they got away with it. I think that shaped their whole life somehow. Then you also have to see they don't think systematically. So what do they do then? They zero in on some problematic thing where things crystallize. And for instance, anti-Semitism is one specific thing, So not like Thomas Aquinas or whatever, or Aristotle or Hegel to build a huge system, but rather, to zero in on things where things coagulate in a certain sense. So, and this is definitely theodicy is this issue. Now, of course, there is this word theos, God, and then decay. And how is Marx also has he a theodicy problem, or Freud and so on? He does. So only what it means then is the scientific study of the causes of suffering. So the God is left out. So it is then scientific concern. So the Freud, studies where do these neuroses come from, or where does this unemployment come from for Marx and so on. So that would then be called theodicy. But Hegel still has a really theological theodicy. That means to ask the justice of God in the face of the slaughter bench of the historical process. That everybody eats everybody and so on. Okay, so that is wonderful. So therefore we can say critical theory relies on Marxism. Here we have to add right away, and you do that also. He relies also on Freud. They relied also on Freud, and they relied also on Nietzsche and so on. So it is slightly a prejudice, to make it into Marxist school. Very often they say it's neo-Marxism and so on. And Marx does, of course, play a great role, but they could also say it's a Nietzsche school, or it is a Freudian school, or whatever. So, okay, so we stressed that enough, I think. Then there is, of course, all the new guys there. Now, Offer is not so new or so, but Albrecht Wellner is another, and then Axel Honneth, of course, and Douglas Kellner, and then there's Lou Beal, we could add, and there are also many younger ones in the Institute. I think I will visit the Frankfurt Institute with Mike Ott. We will go there because he has a sabbatical on the critical theory, and I thought he could live in my house there, my apartment in Frankfurt, and then he could go to that institute and study there a few weeks, which would be very good, for a background. Okay, so I wrote very good and very good because it is very good. It says here, but to transform the miserable conditions of human existence through practical application, turning theory into action. But what I said is that it's not do the positive, it's not do the same thing. That is a question. I mean, every positivist would say we are also for social change. So what is the difference then? And the difference is, think of our wonderful person who is the head of criminology there, Ron Kramer, yeah. I know him for all these years. He participated in building our future studies course and was so beaten, when the university requests that and so on. So certainly he wants to have social change, but as a good liberal, so he would like to have change inside of the system. So he would improve the criminal system, criminal justice system, the prisons, and so on, But the ultimate thing is, of course, that this will strengthen the system as it is. While the Frankfurt School goes to the system as a whole. It's a critique of the whole civilization and not only part of it. If you take only part of it, you're really not only for the system, you strengthen it. Because to the extent, to which you can let steam out and, give milk powder to to the slums or give them some Easter baskets or whatever, you really indirectly strengthen it. But let me turn that around. If you have a Marxist then who says things must only get worse before they can get better, that is a very cruel type of a thing which I could never subscribe adequately. Every social worker, who does something for a family on the north side, he does something good. And I don't think one can make that argument, don't do that, let them really stop, because then they will blow the whole thing up, I mean, the most extreme case is Stalin, who gave orders to the Communist Party not to fight against Hitler, but to fight against the Social Democrats. Strictly dialectically, that was a good type of speculation, and it really happened that way. It got worse, and then he slaughtered him in Stalingrad and so on. But it cost 27 million people, I mean, is that still human that you speculate with 27 million? I rather leave that to divinity, I would not like to make a speculation like this, But it is still done. You can imagine that now with our catastrophe, they say, no, it's going down. Let it go down to hell, But what about all the unemployed and what the people who have to leave their house and have nothing to eat and whatever, I mean, this is a horrible slaughterhouse type of a thinking. But nevertheless, all what we have to know is, first of all, that there is some suffering which no theory can change. And these are sufferings which come from nature, so now one has to see, sickness may be a nature thing, but it may also come from society. So is cancer now a nature thing, or is it a social thing, Now the doctors who are defenders of the system, they will say you have inherited from your grandmother, and so your grandmother, your grandmother, etc. I am still not convinced of this. I think what is inherited is a certain constitution. So if you have a narrow colon, then the poisonous stuff which they give you to eat sits there too long, and then it goes into the walls, and then you have colon cancer. It's interesting, for instance, in Africa there is no colon cancer, because the people go to the toilet 4 times or 5 times. But they have another cancer, liver cancer, which comes from a certain food which has mildew on it. And when they eat this, then they get it. So I think still that what is inherited is the narrow colon, and therefore a certain disposition or a weak immune system, but that the rest comes from outside. So then it could be changed, That means the capitalists are responsible for the food chain and so on, either they cannot do it, then it would have to be federalized. By the way, we do federalize massively. This AIG thing today there is already federalized to 80%. See, this is what nobody seems to see. They call that bailing out or whatever. It means federalization. They bought the whole damn thing up. But even in the federalization process, these gangsters go and go to, what is this city there, this luxury city there, the Gulf. No, in the Gulf.
Oh, and
Louisiana.
No, I mean in the Gulf area. Dubai, yeah, exactly. That's where they went. Dubai is a tremendously luxury type of thing. So yeah, okay. So that is one thing. There are things which no theory can change. There are other things, which theory could change. Then positivists do have social change, but it is different from the one which the critical theory has in mind. And then there is sometimes you emphasize the subjective side, of social change. What can we do inside? I think what one learns from materialists is to look at the objective tendencies. And you had a wonderful example with Bush, The objective tendency overtook him. Subjectively, he was a neoliberal and followed the Chicago school and so on and so on. But nothing helped, you see. That means he said, they told me if I'm not doing this, then the whole economy will go to pieces and so on. That means they were all under the dictate of an objective type. And all phenomenological construction of this shit, I cannot listen to this construction business and so on, because the other side is forgotten. It looks as if we were constructing the law of gravity or whatever. But if you jump from my roof, then you break your neck. No matter what theory, whatever you construct, it will be neck will be broken. So, and the same thing, no matter what what we do, what Obama does, and so on, and the policies and what Congress is all very nice. But at the same time, there is an objective process which mercilessly moves on. That means what Habermas and Benjamin called this merciless progress. Not necessarily something good or bad or whatever, but simply it's progressing no matter what the Bush or Democratic Party or whatever are thinking. And the respect for this objectivity of these trends, is what one has to learn. And in this case we are too idealistic still. Because idealism means that something depends on our consciousness and so on. There is a certain voluntaristic form of Marxism which would emphasize that too. And that's okay. I mean, one should emphasize what we can do as agents of change and movements and so on. But without forgetting these objective tendencies. And Adorno is very good at this. He, makes it always clear. He has a deep appreciation for what goes on in the psyche and so on. But there is something out there, which is merciless and moves on, and ultimately we will have to yield to it. So we can work along these tendencies. So we have here these trends to alternative future number 1 and 2 and 3. And so one could develop an ethics by saying we want to resist the trend, the objective trend toward 1 and particularly toward 2. And we want to support the trend and so on. But with or without support, these trends are there. They are structurally grounded, and they will continue. But one could say, as an individual, as a group, or as a church, or as a party or so, we want to, remove the obstacles so that this trend can assert itself faster or so. Something like that one could do. So whatever personal or collective planning one has, it must always be in touch with these objective tendencies. Okay, that's what I mean here. Is there anything else? Objective tendencies, I mentioned that. So my pessimistic worldview leads me to doubt the ability of critical theory to bring about a reconciled society. This doubt is justified because the critical theory or anybody else will not bring that about. We can analyze that this trend exists, and we can say this is the trend which we would like to support and so on, and the others we want to resist or so. But it sounds too voluntaristic that the critical theory can do something like this. So it is, of course, there's a theory-praxis problem. So when we see the trend, we analyze the trend, and then practically one can found in a party, for instance, in order to support that trend that one can do. But the trend is always the presupposition. Without it, we could not do anything. And one should not, certainly Habermas and they all are very careful to see what a theory can really do for people. Then discourse instead of class struggle. So, the shift to language and recognition has something to do that to have another type of a class struggle, or maybe to replace the class struggle. And that is where Habermas and the younger ones may be too blue-eyed, in hoping that it's possible, because there is a certain contradiction. If you have no equality, that means you have no reciprocal recognition, then you cannot have a discourse. But you want to bring about equality through a discourse, which you cannot have. So there is some kind of a hook in this whole thing. Right? So if you have the labor unions, cannot have a real discourse with the establishment, with the management, or with the ruling class, because there is no mutual recognition. The ruling class does not recognize the labor union as equal, and so how does one approach this now? If you are unequal, you cannot have a discourse. Then you should have a discourse in order to make it equal. It is somehow like Münchhausen. You pull yourself by your own hairs out of the water or whatever. So that is where it becomes too too optimistic. And I think Habermas has seen that, that he maybe was too optimistic to believe that. But it remains still valid, one can do some things. I mean, when you listen to, just turn that thing on and see what the pandits and so on, what they're doing, So I think that to clarify these things, to clarify concepts, to say not to bailing out or incentive package, one could clarify that these are euphemisms for federalization. They don't dare to do this, because they educated people, in the free market thing, and that is the end of the free market, and so they don't dare. They have these cover names, So here one could do something language-wise by overcoming this type of false consciousness. They leave people in these beliefs now because they think, and probably rightly so, that they are not prepared for this, that they have decades and decades of free market conditioning, and they don't dare to swing it around now. Even Obama doesn't do it, He always makes little remarks where he gives people hope that one could return to this, Mike Ott took his whole pension fund out of the Kraft and TIA and went to some kind of a community saving place. What is this called? It's the only thing which was
credit union.
Credit union. It's the only socialistic thing which was left after the Depression. All the productive units went under who were socialized, but the credit union did remain, and so there are credit union for teachers and so he went there because they are not connected with the stock market. But the others, including myself, I mean, I cannot change. I don't know how that happens. I cannot take anything out and take it somewhere else. I have to retire, and then I still am bound to them. So, but this is also secured, and I hope he didn't make a mistake, because the federal government has secured these pension funds. These are for all the teachers in Canada and so on, and others too, doctors and so on. So up to a certain level, maybe 1 million or 2 million is all guaranteed by the. So I hope Mike did not make a mistake there. So we should get back probably. But nevertheless, I mean, what language? Yeah.
It's guaranteed by the FDIC.
Yeah.
That's $250,000.
The one that just said that they're basically bankrupt in 6 months.
Well, they will all be bankrupt.
Well, yeah, but they have unlimited tap to the Federal Reserve, so the Federal Reserve just prints them more money. But it's $100,000, right, normally, and then under certain conditions, it's $250,000. Right.
I mean, the credit unions,
like raw cash.
The credit unions, are solid as far as it goes now, so they did not make these wild speculations and so on. But everything hangs together with everything in that system. So, that's what they told Bush, of course. And so we'll see where it goes. But my point is, to what extent does this talking, this discourse, does it help? And there is certainly room for it. In that sense, to clarify those issues slowly, and that could have a change effect. So if the anchor man would say, but this is not really, I mean, they do it somehow. So suddenly they say, these bonuses, and then they say it already belongs to 80% to the federal government. So then everybody could conclude this now. We are really not in the process of bailing out, but we are in the process of federalization. But then somebody writes in again and said, I'm angry about this bailing out. We should not bail out anybody. Well, in reality, he says we should not federalize any further. But what does he want, And the social Darwinism is strong, It means let them go under, like it's a wilderness. And so one animal fights against the other, so let them go under. But they don't know that these 180 million people have been so closely connected with these insurance. I mean, this is the biggest insurance company globally. I mean, not only in America, all over the place, And there are millions and millions of people's fate depends on this. And so if you let them go under, all the people will go under with it. And that is why Bush had to do something. He probably would have acted as a social Darwinist and say, let them fight it out, and then who fails, fails, and so on. But even that principle they had to sacrifice.
You know, Obama articulated the Roosevelt tradition very well today when he said, I am a capitalist. I'm for capitalism. But I'm not for capitalism where the taxpayer has to constantly make up for the problems.
Well, but that's what capitalism is. And so he will have to... I mean, he himself is part of this, So listen to the language, It's quite interesting how they are worming their way through all of this,
He made it very clear, I think, because he's constantly being attacked as a socialist, that he stated very clear, I am for capitalism, today, but not the capitalism where we constantly have to bail these people out or whatever.
I wonder how many people went, I voted for the wrong person.
Well, that's a great danger. Clinton said that, if they don't go with him, he fell by 5 points in the publicity thing. That may not mean very much, but what will happen is the American people doesn't stay with him. If they get disillusioned fast and so on, and he loses popular power and so on. But I think one thing which we can do as critical theorists is to stay in touch, with that what is said day after day. This is a dramatic thing which is happening. Okay, here's something else. Discourse can be defined as a collective, rational, argumentative dialogue. So, what's the difference between discourse and dialogue? The discourse is argumentative. Not in the bad sense, they have an argument or whatever, but that it has perverted, language-wise, that for us argument means something negative somehow. They have an argument with each other, that means they're each other's hair or so. But that argument is a good thing, so that you propose, like Thomas Aquinas does there in his book, he lets Averroes make his arguments all the way, and then he follows him and makes counter-arguments, and then the better argument should prevail in the end. But by demonstrating the validity of truth claims which are akin to natural scientific laws and also include social norms, made through rationality, it is possible to eliminate domination and equal power and so on. So there are these validity claims. These validity claims are part of a communicative ethics or discourse ethics. What does it mean? How does one arrive at this? The issue in the West is that all morality was theologically based. The critical theory, now Horkheimer would continue with this and would say it would be very dangerous, and what we did since Kant for 200 years, it all failed. But Habermas remains optimistic and says no theological presupposition. Now, if you don't have a theological presupposition, you have to find another one. And the other one is that language potential. But the language potential in relationship to the five-world model. That means the natural world, the inner world, the social world, and the cultural world. So, if we have a speaker and he speaks about nature, we have the validity claim of truth. You have to be truthful, it rains. You have a protocol sentences, it rains, and the correspondence theory of the truth. Your sentence has to correspond with what goes on outside. Yes. If you are a speaker and you talk about your inner world, then you have to be honest. You don't have to talk at all. You can be quiet about your inner world. You don't have to reveal your inner world. That's why torture in these things is so horrible, because it means a violent penetration of your inner world in order to get information and so on. So, but if you say something and you express it, it must be honest. That means what you say must agree with that, what you really feel and so on. If you talk about the social world, about capitalism and so on, it must be rightful. So you are right when you say the critical theory is not value-free. And of course, Durkheim was not value-free, but Weber wanted to be value-free, but wasn't. And neither was Parsons, because if they say, we look at the family and the polity and religion, and we see what functional contribution they make for the survival of civil society. Survival of civil society is a value. And therefore they are not value-free. And they also, while they may think they are value-free, they take the values of the community as it is. So let's see, in the neighborhood, they will take the neighborhood values concerning pornography or whatever, so if they don't have their own. But they do have their own, namely, at least this one value, that everything is judged if it will contribute to the survival of civil society or the demise of civil society. Okay, so when we talk about, in critical theory terms, about civil society, then we would say about rightfulness or fairness and so on. When we speak about culture, we would talk about, tastefulness. And when we then talk about the linguistic dimension, then we would say understandability. Now, this linguistic thing, and you see that all on the roadmap there, this linguistic thing, religious people have put before nature, the logos, the word, and so on. And secular people take that back again and put it into the system. So then when you talk, let's see, you meet somebody on campus, and you talk about things, and then you say, we had a nice talk, we should come together again and should talk with each other again. And so that is, you relate yourself to the world of language now. One must not mix up this with other things, The voodoo economics of Reagan, they mixed up language with the real economic system. So talking about the economy is not already the economy, Not even the study of economics is the economy. These are two different things. And everywhere you see the objectivity is what is missing, which we have these great difficulties. So we have to become good materialists in the sense to talk about the priority of the reality principle over the pleasure principle. What we would like to be, would be very nice, all kinds of things. And maybe we should do dreaming. Karen just told my husband, went out with a neighbor and they want to look at a new boat. He is dreaming. It's good for him to dream because his salary has gone down and down, now he wants to have a boat. But it's good to go on dreaming, but one still has, and Karen will take care of that the reality principle is at the same time taken seriously. The priority of the reality principle is the important thing. Okay, so we have 5 validity claims now, which constitute the discourse ethics of Habermas. It comes really from Appel. He learned from Appel, is another professor in Frankfurt and a very nice fellow, and I participated in seminars of both of them where they did it together, and Habermas would say that he learned a lot from him. And so now you could, our discourse, you can judge it according to the validity claims. By the way, when I mentioned those things where Christianity is, superior to Judaism, for which it paid that high price of idolatry, reflexivity is one of the points where Christianity is superior. Because in Christianity, the individual can reflect himself or herself in the divinity. Because according to this teaching, not only the Logos became flesh, but when the Logos returned, then humanity was taken into the divinity. So the Christian, and Bloch would write about atheism in Christianity, and so it has something to do with that. So the Christian, or the Jew, cannot find himself mirrored in Yahweh or Elohim or El Shaddai, but the Christian can find himself reflected, like in a mirror, in the Trinity. Out of which Feuerbach then, of course, said, that's not a reflection, but that is the projection of human nature and so on. So that after 3 times listening to Hegel's philosophy of religion, he came up with this, which is then the projection theory was taken over by the whole left, but also by the right as well. So everybody thinks in terms of projection. So these are the 5, and so you can criticize this, in your test also completely. You can say, you were not truthful when you said this and this, or you were not honest when you said this, or you were not rightful when you said this about the capitalists, or you were not tasteful, you used anal language all the time, or you were not understandable. And this understandability may even be the first one, the most important one, because if it's not understandable, then you cannot ask if it's truthful or rightful or so. Now, one thing has to be added to it. All the ethics has something to do with universalization. So whenever somebody says here in the States, I did or Bush did what he thought was right, I could jump against the ceiling, because what the hell does it matter, what he thought or whatever. So that means a statement which is still simply the opinion of one man, which is not universalized, has no validity whatsoever. So, but this is part of atomism and part of the American subjectivism or so. So therefore, if it is a religious ethics or a secular one, it has to be universalized. So when you take it's universalized, of course, when you have one God who is the universal Alpha and Omega and so on, then you have the principle of universalization. But when you become secular, you have to find another one. And so Kant, in the categorical imperative, act in such a way that your particular axiom can be the basis of a universal legislation. See, there's the particular and the universal. How do you universalize the particular? The particular without universalization has no ethical consequence whatsoever. And so then Apple has developed a new thing from Peirce here, American pragmatists and Mead, where he would say the so-called a priori of the universal communication community. So we have a problem, abortion, for instance. The issue is to get a consensus about this abortion thing, which includes the possible victims. That is important, because that breaks very often the universality. So what will these 1.5 million people who are aborted every year, what will they say about abortion? And so they cannot talk. So therefore you have to have an advocate. What will the advocate say? The advocate would say, you put me into life, and 3 months later you blow me up again. That's not a very rational type of behavior. So I'm not agreeing, This goes also in terms of eugenics, the new liberal eugenics. When you interfere into the genome in order to make free somebody from the illnesses of the family, you will probably get the consensus of that subject later on that he said, I'm glad you did this, you freed me from that family disease. But what if you say you want to have a beauty queen? The beauty queen could say, I'm glad you made me a beauty queen, but you left me stupid. I want to think a little bit too and talk. Or a big boxer or football player or soccer guy there. He may be very happy that he plays soccer, but he may have some thoughts in his brain as well, and now he doesn't have that. Then you may not get the consensus. In that case, it would not be permitted, and so. Or let's say somebody wants to, with that shield there, in Bohemia or wherever, Czech Republic or Poland, they want to put up that
missile defense shield.
Shield, yeah. Now, if you would say, for instance, that shield means that in the first strike from outside, 100 million Americans have to die on the East Coast or on the West Coast or whatever. You would have to include them into that consensus. Will they consent, the possible victims? And if they say, yes, we 100 million want to die so that 300 million can live, then you could go ahead. So see, there is no theological presupposition anymore. It is rather formal, like the Kantian one too. It's a formalism, and you have to put the content in all the time, and then you come to a conclusion. The great problem, let me add the problem to it, which Habermas has seen, and Apple, and that is the motivation. Even if you know now, this abortion is bad or whatever, there is still the question, why you should do it. Because it's your life, it's short, you want to be happy, you don't want to, make those sacrifices or whatever. And there is no answer to this motivation. In religion, you had a very simple motivation, If you do what the God tells you to do, you will go to heaven. If you don't do it, you'll go to hell. If you do it, you will be happy already in this life, and then you get double happiness in the other life. But that has disappeared. Obviously, the fear of the Lord in Clinton was very weak when he had the blowjob, or when he killed 12,000 people in Belgrade or whatever. So obviously it doesn't work anymore, So, and that is, of course, the secularization of ethics is the answer that this theological basis has disappeared not for individuals or so, but for the civilization as a whole it has disappeared and can therefore not be introduced as an argument any longer, an effective argument in public discourse. Okay, so that I just wanted to add this here about what this type of ethics there is.
We got about 10 minutes.
Okay, very good. And there's some wonderful things you said about this conspiracy movie, and I'm coming to the end here. We can go to this, but we still have not established the test, but that's okay. We can do that the next time. Okay. Very good. And I made some... Okay, very good. Wonderful work. So let's go to the movie, and we will still... You don't have to have the test the next time. We will do it later, but we have to look forward. There will be a third test, the last one, and it has to be in my house on the 20th of April, and so we have to start with it probably on the 8th of April. So, but we still have some time. So let's do the reading. The new reading is this book here, where we have also the concern with Habermas, but particularly with the theology problem. And you can read chapter 2 and 6, which is a story, and then we can go to chapter 1 and so on. So this is from critical theory, and then choose your own depth study again. Keep the same depth study which you had already. The last test and the second test and the last one will have the same structure. You can take your depth study and write about it, or you can take the questions 8 or whatever questions. Okay, now let's look at our movie a little bit further.
Now I have a chance. I'll do mine. I'm not you're willing
to make it a little bit louder? It's louder. Otherwise we can't hear it because he's whispering.
No, all right.
They also tell me all the days and so on.
Yeah. It should be turned off the light.
I don't know if you have mine anyway. We'll make the decision next week. What you want to do. Even if they're all done today.
Is it bombed out? That is brilliant. Say during those attacks of attacks. See that it's in the back of the attack to be caught in the daytime. Have you all seen it? Yeah, there's some food there. I have to bring more cookies. Trying to get us all fat. No margin. No energy. Okay. There was always hope during these bombardments, that people could run away or whatever. So it was an up and down of hope and despair.
Dear God, I shall always come to you.
Now, here we show this because we want to have an alternative to the critical theory. He was not a critical theory man, but he was one of the founders of the sixth paradigm, the ecumenical paradigm, and you see an unbelievable confusion. For instance, here he has falsified documents. He has dated documents back so that the Gestapo would not find out what he was doing in the Abwehr, in the intelligence, army intelligence, under General Canaris. He lied, and so on. He spied. He was part of the assassination attempt against Hitler, and so on and so on. So, at the same time, he was professor of ethics, and he wrote beautiful ethics books. That is his fiancée.
I love you. You must know that. I want you on my life. And there will be regrets if I go. I'm sweetie.
Now, he wants to escape, and he doesn't want to escape because they would kill his whole family. They introduced that the whole family, somebody deserted at the front, the whole family was executed.
They are here. Isn't that my
I know what I don't need. I don't need. I need you.
here that I became married with your father.
Here we have the Gestapo fellow again, always the same. He also has the doctor title. Was the German educational system really a good system, as people dream sometimes? How would you confuse people like that?
You lied to me all the time, you know. You'll see where your God gets you now. What happened? The dossier in the outer archives. You are in it. You know what this means, don't you? Yes. This is what you wanted. I'm ready.
Now they know that he wasn't the resistance and was resolved.
Everything has happened.
It's being transported.
Where?
Siebert.
That is the camp where he's with the hanged. Concentration camp in Bavaria. Now, they want him to work for them. He was in the intelligence, and they want him to go to the Allies and negotiate for them.
Dr. Bonhoeffer, we have a proposition for you. We're offering you a chance to save yourself and your family. Your foreign contacts have been communicated to Herr Himmler. He wondered if you might be able to help us negotiate. After reading the Abwehrplan, we have reason to believe the Allies will listen to you. I don't understand. You want me to negotiate with the Allies? Yes. For you? For Germany? For Germany. If you wish to save your friends and your family, I urge you to do this. I thought you wanted to live. What will happen to your lovely Maria? Hope springs eternal. Hope. Ostentation.
That's the religious Christianity, it's called.
Why would this be a bad thing for him to negotiate?
Not with the Nazis, not for the Nazis.
Yes, but it stops final killing on the front.
This is the end. Taxing to oblivion. Not like you have ever seen.
Well, the
Taxi is especially designed to exterminate
wine into the wound.
Then you go to the Ritz for dinner, but then on the way there you get gassed in your limousine.
Now, one is a Russian
Secret
Service guy, the other one is a British pilot.
Come on, for heaven's sake.
They are all shipped down for execution.
Sorry about that, old chap. I'm paying back. British, not the Secret Service. Hello. Cochrane, Stalin's best friend. Cochrane. British humor. Здравствуйте, господин священник. They're putting in work.
That was how the cars went by me. You have to put fire on in the morning and put wood in.
We will suffocate. I tell you, we will suffocate. There is an extermination check. You're here, right? Russia. The eminent Nazi doctor. I was hoping to meet you. But at the war crimes trial, which you hear amongst us dregs. Fallen out of favour with the party, have you? Or so. Get in there. All of you.
Stove on the back of the car. That's why I want to write them out. That's why we won. They have exactly. they have tanks too, which will that put the high on the more beautiful food, you will have the empty closet and you will have to put it in the wall there. Or windmill or something. You'll have to get a better and bigger garage when it's coming.
Was he some naked man freezing in the cold? How long it took them to die? See what color they turned? Did you keep notes? And now the Nazis want to get rid of you, do they? Oh, poor boy, poor boy. You bastard.
The Allies are beating each other up in the car there. The Russian and the British. But however, I have to make peace.
Sure, let me give us here. I don't understand how you can protect that. Because he believes that he's to the God. He thinks he's holy. You really do believe this day and age, this godforsaken death trap? Yes. This godforsaken death trap.
Luxembourg is this illustration.
British Mueller, step down.
That's a horrible situation.
Can you read this name?
Russian name.
I'm with her. We were in prison together. I want the other prisoners. Where do they go? That's your problem.
Back to where?
Where do they go? That's your problem.
Oh, really? Yeah.
All in God's time.
So he went for the other there. So solidarity is in way of misery. These are the German refugee, and she goes to all these bombardments now in order to find them. And this miserable stone-driven bus there cannot come up the hill.
You blow that wood away. Axle's gone. Stop. So what are we going to do now? Not really. Wait for Christmas to the Americans. So close. The war must be almost over. We'll put in a good word for you with the Allies.
You're a rather helpless creature then.
I need orders. I need an order. I need an order.
There you go. You have the authoritarian personality. You cannot function without authority. That was in March 1945.
Yes? Father, you're relieved.
He's happy now.